Walker, how you doing?
I'm so great, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
We were kind of rallying back and forth on some other topics, but we've got a lot to talk about today because I think there's a lot of common interests we have. You've got some crazy experience, and I'm personally just super pumped to dive into a bunch of it. So for the listeners that aren't too familiar with you or your book yet, or some of your past, Walker, maybe just take us back to what are some of the big milestones that got you where you are today? And how did you surround yourself with all this world of being an entrepreneur?
Okay, so let me start with, maybe let's keep the end in mind a little bit. A lot of people for the last, let's say decade have often called me an entrepreneur or a serial entrepreneur, but I never called myself that, right? And the reason why is because every time I started a business from scratch, I never was able to exceed that, $1 million in revenue mark, right? And this is where, the startups I'm involved in where I'm the co-founder, right? So the way that I found luck along the way was kind of by buying businesses that were already there and then kind of, innovating them with my skill set, right? And taking them to the next level or whatever. And I guess in one instance or not, right? I mean, even just keeping it as it is and as a holding, as you were. So, what got me to this, what I started calling acquisition entrepreneurship, which I think that term sort of popped up a couple of places at the same time, but I didn't know it. So, as far as I knew, I coined the term, right? But so from, where I was to becoming an acquisition entrepreneur, the milestones along the way kind of went like this. I had a startup with another guy, two other guys really in business school. So I got my MBA at WashU in St. Louis. And we had a technology, we had licensed the technology for point of purchase advertising. And this technology was 2003. And the technology today is known as real 3D. Like when you go to the movie theater and you put on the clear 3D glasses, right? And see 3D movie. Yeah. So that didn't exist. Like in 2003, 3D was like the red and blue stuff, right?
Totally.
Right. So, and whether that same actual, technology became real 3D, I actually don't know. But the point is we had this in 2003 for point of purchase advertising. And we were deep in conversations with Walmart. They wanted to roll it out to a number of stores, if not every store. We were deep in conversations, raising capital. We didn't need that much, like $1 million to $1.5 million we were trying to get. And we were finalists in, probably, one of the biggest, business plan startup competitions in the regional Midwest anyway.
Which one was that?
Well, it's the Olin Cup out of the Scandalaris Center. But so basically, we were deep in this, and it was one of these things where I was doing it while I was an MBA student. And the month of graduation, it all came unraveled. And basically the licensing fell apart and we didn't have what we thought we had and it was retracted. And what they didn't say was, hey, we're going to go make Avatar with James Cameron, right? But that's what happened. And we didn't know that.
Right?
So here it was, this sort of like really innovative idea, like getting product market fit, like more stressing out about how we're actually going to execute the product. And then it all kind of fell apart, right? So this was my first like startup experience. As you know, a lot of famous entrepreneurs say, hey, it's all about at-bats, right? So I'm like, hey, no problem. Startups fail. We all know it. Just put that failure feather in my cap and move on, right?
Heard that before.
Yeah, right. So it's one of these things where I knew that that there was a way to buy a small business. And when I went out into the market in 2004 to try to figure out how to do it, I was, in my late 20s. I really had no money of consequence, and what I was met with was a truly opaque market that was fragmented and just had this huge range of, let's just say, talent and quality in terms of brokers, right? And today I know that, a business broker, an advisor, an investment banker, they're all the same thing, and it just depends on how it's actually being executed. Back then I didn't know the difference, right?
Oh, and by the way, there's a lot of people that don't know the difference of what people are doing and executing on.
Right. So it's one of these things where it was in 2004 where I was looking for the book that I didn't have. I'm looking for that high quality resource to help me navigate this landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up failing trying to buy a business and kind of went corporate for a while. But I released the book, Buy Then Build, How Acquisition Entrepreneurs Outsmart the Startup Game, like last month. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been a long journey, but that's
And
where
we're
I'm
good.
starting.
No, and that's awesome. And that's journey is what we're here to unpack because, how obviously in the 14 years before you ended up launching it, what you learned in order to actually to put it all together. And I think it is a challenge. I'm just curious, Walker, because like
Yeah.
so many people, and I think I saw that you're an EO, and there's a lot of EO listeners or Vistage listeners, and I think there's a lot of people that struggle with that, that $1 million mark. If they, if you think about this, like the probabilities of starting, what is it like? How many of the 80% are out of business in year 5, and then how many get above $1 million? It's just like why? It's like why would you ever try? But then,
Well, and Ryan, the thing is with those numbers, like if you talk to real entrepreneurs out there doing it, they don't believe those numbers. Those
right.
are those are like the U.S. Department of, forgive me, I forgot. But it's like but basically all that means is that there's like a legal entity that's open and sitting there, right?
Right.
That can close
Right.
it down. So I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I think you're right too, because like, yeah. And it's funny because some of the stats that I usually throw out is there's 27 million companies in America, but 10 million of them are incorporated LLCs from LegalZoom from someone that charged $2,000 for a picture.
Right.
Or something.
Right. Well, think of it like this. All like if there is a better way to start from scratch, the best way that we've ever come up with is venture capital, right? So in other words, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to go get VC money. And, on average, I get it. So now on average, I'm going to get somewhere between, 60 and 70 million in cash, right? There's a 75% chance that my startup is going to go completely to zero.
Right.
Process that. And that's the best way, right? Venture capital is a business model for venture capitalists.
Totally. Not even for the investors, because the venture capitalists have the lowest amount of risk in that situation ever.
That's right. And what do they say? They're sort of back of the hand is, one is going to really make it, whatever, 10x or whatever. 2 or 3 of them are going to break even, and the rest, whatever. Right.
So Walker, like what I'm curious. So if we kind of go, what is the biggest challenge? Why is it so much harder to start than to buy? And what are some of the fundamental things that you see as constraints for these entrepreneurs that are hitting that $1 million or whatever it is? I mean, what is it? Capital? Is it resources? What are some of the big things that they have issues with that you see?
Well, I mean, the research will tell you things like product market fit, not enough capital, whatever. The thing is, not enough capital is the reason. In other words, if you had enough money to do whatever you wanted for as long as you needed in order to pivot, no matter how many times you needed to, in order to establish an infrastructure that then could provide profitable revenue, then we'd all get there eventually, right?
Right.
So, for me, it's that product market fit. And I think that, trying to create a market from scratch is incredibly difficult. Let me tell you a story. So, as a co-founder in an enterprise SaaS business that, was basically a mobile application, for the enterprise. And we had recruited the consulting division head of the product we were trying to upset from Microsoft to be our CEO. We went through one of the top 10 accelerator programs in the world. We were oversubscribed. Our dev team was currently building mobile software for special ops teams for the U.S. government. We brought in a CTO of a Fortune 500 company to work with our dev team one-on-one and had them on board as an equity advisor. We had an all-star team and were fully funded, right? 9 months later, we were completely out of cash, even though we had beta programs running at, half a dozen big brand names that you would know, right? And the thing was that, the Achilles heel of our entire model, in my mind, and in retrospect, and if any of those people are listening, I might be wrong, but my take on it is we would show it to the users and they would jump up and down and freak out. And they're like, how do I get this? And the problem was, because it was at the enterprise level, we had to install it at the enterprise level. If we just gave it to a personal user on their iPad, for example, the company's SharePoint system would perceive it to be a virus, and it would shut down and lock out everyone nationwide. Now, it didn't
Oops.
happen every time, but it did happen like, 2 or 3 times out of 10, right? And so we couldn't just open it up on the App Store and start helping people, solve their individual problems. Instead, we were taking this really lightweight, thing and basically trying to sell it to COOs of major organizations
Oh
and
my
charge them a per
gosh.
user per month fee, right? Now, if you're a COO of a major corporation, you've got 2 or 3 things you're trying to get done, and trying to make your team incrementally more happy with like a lightweight, cheap thing is not something that's going to move the needle for your career. So I think at the end of the day, we needed to figure out how to get around our model and reach the individual users, because that would have worked. But
Yeah.
a lot of money.
Well, and it's so crazy because like totally get that. I couldn't even imagine. I mean, selling enterprise stuff to people that there's 17 layers of buyers, it just sounds
Mhm.
like a horrible
Right.
situation.
That's
It's,
right. And that's
no,
where the trends are right now. That's the adolescent trend right now, right?
yeah.
Enterprise level SaaS.
So then, which makes a ton of sense to me. And then so
Mm.
then what I've noticed too, Walker. So you have like I've kind of got the 2 different buckets. And actually, you and I were talking about John Warlow, and I'll maybe steal or relay the his kind of philosophy in these psychographics, where there's he calls them craftsmen. I don't know if you've heard this, and I don't think he's got any of the his books or his material, but there's craftsmen or essentially solopreneurs, right? They just pay for their income through their craft. And then there's a lot of those people. That's kind of like the 10 million people that we were talking about. And then you've got mountain climbers, which are VCs, and they're serial entrepreneurs. And then there's the freedom fighters, and the freedom fighters are mid-market companies. And what he actually noted with these people is that their level of funding is actually different. All these freedom fighters are usually single or partnership owned,
Yep.
long holds, family, that kind of like the EO visages of kind of the audience here. And then there's the mountain climbers, which are VC backed, exit strategies, SaaS tech, that kind of stuff. And what I find is interesting, kind of taking your scenario where you were intentionally doing this stuff. I don't know if you found this, and this can kind of dovetail into even parts of your book and your kind of mission statement. But it's like, do you see like that freedom fighter graphic or that bucket as people that kind of accidentally became entrepreneurs for the most part?
So I'm sorry, Ryan. What's your question?
Well, that's kind of my question. Is like okay, that's a good. So
I guess what I'm thinking of is the E-Myth. Like, I'm familiar with what you're
right,
saying.
yeah. So it's like along the E-Myth line of like
Yeah.
where like I find a lot of these people where like, so it's not the okay. Here I'll piggyback it off your story. Is that
Sure.
there's someone that had a job at corporate America, and then one of their customers said, if you did this, I'll buy that stuff from you. And then immediately you've got $1 million company. Or like, someone was in the right place, knew the right manufacturer, got that IP, and like blew it up on Amazon. Or so it was like almost like, does that make sense?
Totally. I guess this is what I would, let me compare it to this. Like, it's one of these things where, if I meet another person who is an entrepreneur that's starting their business, and I say like, oh, that's great. What's your product? Oh, we're an SEO firm. I just want to pull my hair out. It's like, yes, online marketing is booming. Yes, there's an ongoing demand for it, but it's like, there's already, I don't know, 30, 40 of those companies, like in St. Louis alone. I'm sure I'm exaggerating. But
I think it's more than that.
Yeah, right. But the point is there's so many of them that it's a perfect acquisition entrepreneur sort of, story. Like, I feel like a roll up could occur at any, sort of local level or even regional level, depending on, how they're getting customers. So it's one of these things that on the surface, even like, 5 years ago, starting an SEO company sounded really sexy. It sounded like, wow, they really, they know what they're doing. This is cool. But they were popping up all over the place. And it was like, well, you don't need to do that. You can actually go buy an SEO firm for pretty low multiple and just kind of get going right away because of all the people that start them and then get burnt out or get stuck or whatever it is. To your point, right? It's like, I know SEO, I get one customer. Next thing you know, I get 2 more. I lose one. I get 2 more. At the end of the year, I've got 12 customers. Now I'm running a business, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So then let's why don't you give the listeners your definition of acquisition entrepreneur, how you got to that, and some of the big, like characteristics of that philosophy.
Sure. So, at the fundamental level is simply this, startups fail. So, as entrepreneurs, what can we do to address our pain of the fact that, starting a business from scratch is actually punishment for not understanding statistics very well, right? So my solution to that problem, and just in my own life, has been to buy existing companies and then build them from there, right? So in other words, all we're trying to build, the fundamental thing that all entrepreneurs are trying to build, is a new infrastructure that can generate revenue, that the gross margin supports that infrastructure. In other words, I want an infrastructure that can produce profitable revenue, right? That's it. That's all we're trying to build. Because the minute you stop focusing on cash flow and you start focusing on how many people you can help, that's the moment of success for an entrepreneur, right?
Right.
So by buying an existing company, you can, acquire a firm that already has product market fit, it already has cash flow, and then you can build it from there. And that can look so many different ways, right? I mean, it just depends on your skill set and the opportunity at hand. Let me give you one example. As our software startup was kind of falling apart and running out of cash quickly, a broker who I had worked with to help me, well, ironically enough, the first company I sold it to an acquisition target. And I don't want to say that my vision for the company was so intriguing that he decided he wanted to buy our company, but that's what happened, right? And so I called the broker that helped with that trend, or he called me. The broker called me, and he said, "Hey Walker, how's that startup?" And I said, "Oh, Gary, it's rocky." He said, "Good. There's a perfect business. You've got to see it. It's a great fit for you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" So anyway, I looked at this company. It had a printing component to it, which kind of made the hair on the back of my neck crawl. You and I were both in the printing industry. We know how cutthroat that can be. But the sort of son of the founder had eliminated all of the printing equipment and sort of turned it into this sourcing and fulfillment center, right? And he had this kind of like DOS era system that was spread out across all these customers. And conceptually, it was great. It was just very dated and kind of needed to be upgraded and user friendly. It was not user friendly at all. I ended up buying the company. I ended up using the cash flow of the company to build out a proprietary e-commerce system that we then rolled out to all the existing customers. And within 9 months, we had almost 20,000 users on our new software system.
Holy cow.
Which was exactly what we were trying to do at the startup and couldn't get done. And then you look at the economics and you start thinking, wow, it's more affordable, it's more accessible. All these baby boomers are retiring, on and on and on. And the buy then build story started to come together for me.
Which I literally, so I'm in a co-working space right now because I float around the Twin Cities, and you have no idea how many people like, oh yeah, I think we've started this fund. And I'm like, yeah, you got like 50 grand. And you're like, we're going to buy companies. I'm like, sure you are. It's like, but I think the seriousness is like, there's a lot of people talking about it these days because, I don't know if you've found those numbers, but there's about 4.5 million companies out of the mid-market that are going to be transitioning over the next 5 or 7 years. So it's like a huge number of these people. And so what we can do, Walker, because I want to kind of split, for the listeners who are on either sides of these. And I would actually argue that the listeners should be on both sides, that you're going to have people that are potentially getting ready to exit. And so I think that there's what your knowledge base and your experience is like, what are the things that you're doing as a buyer? What are you looking for that they can potentially help themselves? But then also on the flip side, so what should they be aware of, and what are your big red flags? Why you would do a lower multiple, and all those different things that you're doing that they're not. And if someone's got a little bit more runway and wants to, instead of acquiring someone, do it to your own business, right? Because they might be able to maximize the value of their business. But then also on the flip side is, some of these companies, I think for them to get to the multiple and the valuation that they need to go out and acquire companies before they sell it. So I think it's, does that make sense? Oh
yeah, totally.
So we can take it any direction you want, but I think no matter who's listening, they'll benefit from it, because I think whether you're buying on or the buy or the sell side, this is so important to you and how you're viewing these companies.
Yep. So, okay, based on your question, I've got like three answers in completely different directions. But let's just start with, yeah, I need to unpack what you said a little bit because,
Yeah.
I do help online entrepreneurs exit their business. And as I talk to them, I kind of help them with, here are the things that are going to drive value in your company. On the acquisition entrepreneur side, and when I'm buying, I think that you can look at an opportunity any number of ways and you simply need to categorize it, right? So let's start there. It's something that I call the Acquisition Entrepreneur Matrix or the AE Matrix, right? And basically, there's four different types of business profiles that allow a buyer to build value. The first is going to be, eternally profitable. This is the sort of, HBR profile that came out of, Harvard. And they wrote the book on how to buy a small business based on this eternally profitable kind of model. Number two is the turnaround. Number three is high growth. And number four is a platform business. Okay. The eternally profitable business is one of these where the goal of the acquisition is to reduce risk. It's like, I've never bought a business before. I don't know what I'm doing. Probably shouldn't say it like that, but it's sort of like, it's sort of like, I'm just looking for that thing that's going to have like zero technological threats moving into the space. I always think of, like snow plowing or corporate window washing or, something like this, something where like, you just look at it and you say, I have no idea how that would actually, there's no player. Yeah. I mean, it's just sort of like, right. So you buy that kind of a business and you just sort of work that eternally profitable kind of model, hoping to get, hoping that your business is growing at 1 or 2% rather than declining 1 or 2%. But if it declines, don't worry about it because it's going to come back up and just kind of float around neutral. Right. So no big growth opportunities, but you can really hang your hat on this. Right. Next is the turnaround. This is going to be, there's varying levels of this, everything from like, whatever, I'm gonna bail them out on the debt, on the front steps of the courthouse and take over this business, to just kind of trending down and like will be in trouble soon, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things that you pick them up for low multiples or even the debt on the books and have an opportunity to turn the company around, usually benefiting from the infrastructure and revenue that's already there and just kind of right sizing the business, right? On the other side, you've got high growth. What I always think of in this situation, I always think about these really high growth software as a service companies, right? Things that, they're catching on real quick. They're multiplying fast. There's not a lot of operating expenses. And so it's growing, let's just say 30% or more year over year over year, right? It's going to carry a higher multiple, but as long as you can keep that growth going, it's actually a low multiple, right? I mean, it's kind of the catch 22 as a seller, which is, well, when do I actually sell? Because I'm going to make more money if I hold on to it, right? Lastly is this kind of platform model. What this is in my mind is, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, you've got an idea, you have a skill set already intact. And when every single business that you look at that's for sale or not, the addition after you buy it that makes a difference is you. And so by applying your skill set, your drive, your ideas to a business that could be acquired and then either, turned on to a new trend or taken to the next level, whatever that looks like, to me, that's the platform model. And it provides both maximum value and maximum growth. Those are the kinds of things that, I look for when I'm looking for a business. I either look at my skill set because I'm going to buy it and manage it myself, or if I'm scaling acquisition entrepreneurship, I will look at, okay, here's my manager. What type of business will fit them?
Yep. And then also probably in line with all that stuff, I'm assuming you're looking at the different cross-pollination of services and products and all that kind of stuff. Cause you could probably you could have a platform business, but then you're taking maybe one of those lifestyle businesses and applying it to some of the other stuff, and the whole machine gets a bigger growth rate or something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about is, synergies, right? Or strategic acquisitions, I guess.
Yep.
So it's one of these things where we, let's jump back. Let's go back to the printing company. I know we were both in that space. So, what the company had done before I got there was try to hire sales reps with existing books of business, right? That they could then, sort of bring over. You're talking about a mature industry,
Mhm.
Again, but in the 90s, one of these eternally profitable types of companies, right? So maybe not by the late 90s, but anyway, so the trick with that is it never worked, right? Like the customers of that sales rep never came over. And I
Totally.
tried it. Yeah, I tried it a few times as well, and like 4 times, and it just never worked. And then I was like, well, what is this? And I started looking at the data, and I don't have that on hand, but basically, some large amount of customers, call it 80%, feel like their sales rep don't understand their business at all, nor do they really truly understand the value that the company is providing. So the operations of the business are what that customer is ultimately buying, and that sales rep, sure, they've got the relationship, but like they're not the provider of the value, right?
Mhm.
But if a sales rep leaves, that company is at risk of losing, on the high end, call it 10% of that sales rep's customer base. So yet again, it occurred to me in the printing industry that it was like, well, wait a minute, if we acquire a printing business and retain all the salespeople, you actually get effectively 100% of that business. And that is actually the best way to grow. And if you start to break down the economics of how acquisitions work, it's actually cheaper than hiring a sales rep anyway, or it can be, right?
Right. So, and oh God, I mean, I had so many, I got so many sales rep stories. I don't even know how to start. So, and print
That's a
sales,
different
too,
podcast.
right? Yeah, different podcast on why you don't want to be a sales manager.
Right.
Um, I want to buy the company that then manages those salespeople, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
well, and let's take the train of thought that we were kind of going on buying companies to get to your eventual exit, because and then we can tee off the interview with
Mhm.
things, if you're going to be selling, things you should be really concerned about or looking at, because you're going to be a target at some point, and why you don't, but like as far as the buy side, I think, Walker, there's so many of our clients or these and people that I talk to where there are a lot of those people that are pretty much in that bucket of internally profitable. But what I see is that, so if you think about the numbers, let's say you're a $2 million company, you're making 10% EBITDA, 200 grand. There's not a lot of wiggle room or cash flow after the salaries and all that. So it's literally a lifestyle business where they're probably working a lot into the whole John Warlow built to sell kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And when they run these numbers, and I've done a couple other interviews about how to back into what your, like, essentially your passive cash flow needs to be, they're so significantly off, Walker, that it's like they can't sell, because if they sold after taxes, after this, they're going to walk away with 400 or 500 grand
Mhm.
and have 2 or 3 years of income. Like,
Right.
so, but if I were to chug away, kind of like you were saying, doing certain things, I mean, I'm still not going to hit my goal with the 3% growth or 10% growth that I'm doing right now, because I would need to do so many things to get to my 3 to 5 million net that I need. So what are some when you think about these people, how should they be looking at potential acquisitions to bolt onto what they're doing?
Yes. I guess what I would say there is growing through acquisition is a fantastic reality for those that have found it. Basically, I mean, first you've got to start with the downside. Okay. I mean, something like, and I'm reaching back into, my MBA days, but it's something like almost 50% of, acquisitions fail to materialize the value they thought they were acquiring. Right.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
and as someone who has made strategic acquisitions and bolted on, you can't you can't ignore the complexity of merging two companies together, no matter how insignificant it appears to be. Okay. It's a project. So when I look at companies that are like, oh yeah, we've got, we just got a bunch of funding, or whatever the reason is, and we're going to run out, and here's our quota, we're going to buy a company a month, for the rest of the year. To me, that just is insane. Like, maybe they can do it, and I obviously hope they can, but it's one of these things where, to me, it's a one at a time kind of thing. Like, you've got to be able to merge them correctly. Obviously, the thing, look, part of the reason why, so I help online entrepreneurs in the lower middle market exit their companies. Okay. And part of the reason I do that, there's a couple of reasons. One, there's not a lot of people in online businesses. Like the EBITDA you just said, based on that high revenue number, you can get that kind of EBITDA at a significantly lower revenue number in the online world, which I
It's
love.
it's wild, actually.
Wow. Right. Number two, in the areas where I work, I don't get a whole lot of like corporate acquisitions. And we get private equity and things like this. But the thing is that even when that happens in this space, there's no heads rolling, there's no like, oh yeah, we're going to buy this company and clean out the operating expenses by firing these 20 people. Like, I don't have to deal with that, which is beautiful. It makes my life so wonderful. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously those are the types of things that can really, maximize the acquisition.
Yep.
I guess it's, if you look at operating efficiencies, if you look at the end of the day, I guess that's it. I bought a company once where I walked in and I met the seller, and within, 1 second, I knew that I absolutely was not going to buy this company. It was one of these where I met the guy and I'm like, this is not going to work, whatever. But I had, driven a while to get there. And so I couldn't say like, oh, I forgot I've got this call with Ryan, I got to go, but I'm like there and I'm looking and I'm talking to the seller and I'm sitting there with the package in front of me. And then all of a sudden, these two things kind of went together. And the seller was talking and I'm looking at the P&L, the income statement. And then I start asking questions about the income statement back to the seller. And I start to realize in my head, the seller is the problem with the business, right? Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't even have considered this as a turnaround. It's just that all of a sudden I realized that there was so much operational inefficiency going on that simply by getting in there and operating it properly, it was going to make it significantly more profitable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when a company is going out looking for another company to acquire, they either need to look at, okay, do we want to accelerate what we're already doing? Or do we want to kind of catch a different trend over here in our industry and try to catch the upside of that bell curve while it's still small?
Well, and then, to piggyback off of one of your other comments too, is like, what you did with the printing business is like, can you go buy a customer base? And so let's say it's making 5% or whatever, and maybe it is running fairly efficient. But is there something else that you could bolt on top of that would double the growth, right? I mean,
let me give it to you like this. So the first company I bought was a book printing company. Okay. And the week I bought it, the Amazon Kindle came out. Now, right. Now, listen, it's not like I didn't see it coming. There was a lot happening at that time, but actually what I saw was that people were starting to buy books online. And sure enough, when you looked at the empirical evidence supporting the trends in the industry, yes, Amazon was making a lot of headlines, but they first of all, number one, the book printing business was still over like 100 billion in revenue. It was huge. Mm-hmm. And obviously the trends were moving a different way with this new technology, ebooks, right? But people were ordering books online, and then they were being printed at low runs and keeping inventory down, or even print on demand for like JIT, just in time shipment, even single copy, right? Look, we all know that exists today, but that wasn't so clear, right? Whatever that was, let's say 15 years ago, 12 years ago. So it's one of these things where I bought the company, I knocked a wall down over in pre-press. I put in, 3 digital printing presses, and then went and same thing. I turned around and told all the existing customers, hey, we've got this new thing we're rolling out. It's going to be JIT, keep your inventory low, And, within 18 months, it was over 20% of the business, right?
Wow.
And it's one of these where, the printing industry is extremely fragmented. We were not on the map. And we went into a rough time where a lot of printing companies were going out of business, like a lot of them, right? We were, I'll just say, flat during the Great Recession. And the banker actually, my banker at the time looked at me and said, hey, flat's the new growth model. And he just, it was true, if you remember those times, right? So
you were just happy you weren't folding.
Right, exactly. Like I was like his crown jewel of that time. But it was one of these where every other owner of a printing company, with all due respect to them, it was a bunch of, gray-haired, fat cat guys with deep pockets complaining about how it wasn't the 1990s anymore. Everyone in my age group or our age group was running from it. They're like, no way. That's like, if you want to be sexy, you go on the other side of print. This is not where you want to be. But the truth is it was the best time since Gutenberg to try to make something of the company. And after about 24 months of implementing that, we were one of the largest 1.5% of printing companies in North America. And
wow.
It's just, this little thing. Now I got to a point where I looked at, okay, now I need to take it to the next level. I'm going to build this system where people can get instant quotes online, and then, these custom quotes for their custom projects. And then there's going to be a little green button in their email, and they just upload their files, and then we rip it, and then they approve the proof. And then if it's color and black and white, it goes on to the different presses automatically. And I priced this thing out. It was a 7-figure build out, right? I mean, it was
Oh my God.
crazy.
Yeah.
So I knew I could buy a book printing company cheaper than that, right? So I went out on a 2.5-year search looking for, okay, where's that digital book printing facility out there that, they've hit their limits. But, for me, I need access to that workflow. And, they can't, they've hit a glass ceiling and can't get into my world. So, where is that opportunity? And it was that effort that ultimately led to the exit of the company.
Well, I want to touch on in a second too, is like, so what I find interesting, Walker, is that this whole EOS traction movement and the Rockefeller habits, working on your business in the E-Myth and all this stuff that's been going on for the last decade or so is like this, what you just described is like all that the business owner should actually be dealing with in my truest opinion, right? Where like you
Totally
should
agree.
you should be looking at your business as an asset. As long as you got cash flow to hire the people, then those strategic decisions and those things that you're just talking about is like all that you should be doing to be able to grow and to do the things that you need to do. And I'm curious, as you were doing that, because you said it was a 2.5-year search for that.
Yeah.
And then you said, and you kind of topped it off with which led to the ultimate exit is, were you doing all of this in light of, I'm trying to hit a specific EBITDA or a specific valuation, and I've got a potential couple exit targets in mind? Like, how were you balancing that eventual situation to harvest the value with what you were doing? I mean, did you think about it?
I did, but the time was very different. I mean, the economic landscape today is thriving, right? And it's one of these things where at that time, that was not the situation, and I wasn't looking at it in terms of, I've got this target, because I was in my 30s, and I knew that I wanted to build this company. I knew that I felt it was the best time since Gutenberg to actually make a significant difference in that industry. And I truly believe that every business out there has an opportunity, and it tells you what to do, right? I mean, if you look at a business, the growth opportunity of that business is very clear. Buggy whips, I mean, we always use, oh yeah, it's going the way of the buggy whip. Well, all the buggy whip companies were actually car parts distributors. So they did just fine after the buggy whip dropped out, except for probably the main manufacturers, right? Which I think then switched into wheels and such. But the point is if you look at, I'll throw another name out there, Jim Collins. He wrote that book, How the Mighty Fall, right? And the subtitle is like, and how the others, thrive, or, the subtitle sells the book. And, we don't want to learn about failure. But anyway, the point is that we all believe that these startups are the ones that dominate new industries, right? And it's real easy to look at examples that it's very clear, like Amazon, right? Or I guess Apple, right? I mean, this kind of a thing. Well, but the empirical evidence suggests that although entrepreneurs and their startups help create and launch the new industries, probably those, with VC backing, those 1 out of 10 that really make it, it's actually the existing companies that make the leap to the new trend that end up dominating that industry.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a bunch of sense to me. Like, just with the sheer quantity of the Main Street businesses that are out there, I mean, it's like half of our GDP are privately held family and partnership businesses.
Right. So to pull it around and say, I mean, your question was sort of like, what was my North Star in that at that time? And it really was, this is my opportunity. This is my business. I had 50 families that I was responsible for, and people that, I mean, that, but it's like people that don't have that experience. They don't understand it. Like, it's like, it's, that's why EO exists, right? Is you've got a lot of people depending on you. This was my opportunity and my future. And this was the trend that needed to be conquered. This was the challenge that I had in front of me.
So how did that whole exit process go? Did someone knock on the door, or did you?
Oh no. I looked at 27 companies over 2.5 years, most of which were not for sale. Right. And at the end of the day, I think I can be transparent about this. I found Publishers Graphics in Chicago. And we reached out to them. They were not for sale. And it was like, oh my God, this is the perfect company. I mean, they had an IT infrastructure that, just the workflow was everything I wanted. It was, I can't think of the word in my head, but it was the most substantial in the industry at the time. Mm-hmm. And I thought there was only two companies in really the world that had mastered print on demand. Turned out there was three. And so Publishers Graphics had absolutely nailed all of the infrastructure I was trying to hit. And after talking with them for about 4 months, the CEO up there said, listen, everything you want to do makes perfect sense and I want to do it. I just want to change one thing. I want to buy you. No problem. Here I am, I'm like 35 years old or whatever in the printing industry. And that was fine. Now, listen, I was like, look, this is my vision and I don't care who executes it. It doesn't have to be me. It can be you. I don't care. Right. As long as it happens. Right. So that was an exciting time. And I learned another lesson, Ryan, at that time, which was, when you if you wait until the end of your career to sell your business, you are going to be totally surprised what it's worth. Right. In other words, you might have a number in your head, but there's a 100% chance that number is wrong. Right. It's just, where on which side is it? And I will say, I started using a broker because I started to approach business owners without a broker first and just said, hey, let's talk. I want to buy you. And 100% of them wanted 20 times EBITDA. And it was just like, okay, that's not how this works. And I've got everything to gain by educating you on how this works. So you're not going to listen to me. So I ended up, utilizing a broker and using someone else to help me.
Did you not use a broker to sell to that guy?
No, I did because I eventually used a broker to help me with outreach. And it was basically, he would call in and say, listen, I've been specifically asked to call you by this buyer who has engaged me. They've covered my fees, So, it's not one of these like, hey, you want to sell your business? Like, I can help you. Like, I got buyers. Like, this was like, I handpicked them and found them, and he would reach out.
So what was some of the things, and I think it kind of comes to that point where it's important for these listeners, because going out and buy, all the reason I really highly suggest that people should be going out and looking at ways to accelerate their growth and value by doing what you're talking about. It's totally such a no-brainer. And then, but a lot of these people, if most of the listeners are baby boomers and then other people are just in light of what you're trying to do, I think it's kind of pretty much both ends of the spectrum. What did you learn over that experience of selling that you realized like how the value is applied? Even though you had bought companies, Walker, was there things you learned that you were not aware of when you were the one selling?
Let me think. I think the big thing was that, it's one of these things where, the day I sold, I had no debt on the business. Right. And that was great. But what I learned was that at the time of my exit, which again, I'd built this, great thing, and not by myself. It wasn't we had a team of great people, and we really executed very well. And what I learned was, the value of my business, because it was in this mature market, was going to be pretty much the same when I was 35 and when I was 65, right? So for those that wait and just sort of hold on to their business and kind of stop growing and get comfortable, I would say it's at that moment that you should really sell, because, you need to continually be moving on. And it was that insight that kind of I eventually turned into, okay, I bought a business, and then I was like, okay, well, how do I scale buying businesses, right? And then I started using managers to buy more companies that I didn't in turn have to run. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's interesting. I've got this friend who just sold his company for a significant amount of money, and he articulated the way that when you said, and you did a pretty good job too of saying it's a way to continuously move on, because essentially you've got like a bond that's going to clip away at 4% over and over and over again that you're locked, your capital's locked into and tied up in, and you're working in some of it. But what he said is, he goes, I can get 7 years worth of income today and then roll it into other companies that then I have other shareholders and other people boosting my capital for me.
That's right.
I was like, isn't that a great way to put it?
That's right. That's exactly it. And so, and after I sold my first company, that's exactly what I did. I ran out and bought 6 more. right?
6 more companies?
Yeah, I did.
What were the different, and what was the strategy behind the different companies? And was it a big holding company that you'd wrap them all into? Or what
I mean, sort of the brand that I guess holds them all is Centra. It's just it's my name that means kind of nothing to anyone else. But the strategy was, again, just looking at my skill set and and the opportunity that a company has, and then looking at, I would find and meet managers that I would want to employ, and then use their skill set and match it to a growth opportunity. So today I own companies in e-commerce, manufacturing, and distribution.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool.
I want to jump in here, but I'm not sure how much time we have left, but something keeps kind of circling around me, and I'm not sure when it's going to come up. So I just want to throw it out there.
Yeah, no, go for it.
A lot of times people that are exiting a business, they have this mindset of like, oh, the goal is to sell it when it's at its peak and it's worth its absolute maximum amount, right? And I think that two things happen. One, if you actually get to that peak, it's not worth quite as much, okay? And number two, a buyer is going to understand that it's at that peak and they're not going to pay as much for it. In other words, when you're selling a business and when you're buying a business, the big overlap is there's got to be a very clear growth opportunity. Let me say it like this, the best acquisition entrepreneurs will find and see the opportunity that the sellers don't necessarily see, okay? But the point is that, if you completely maximize a run and there's no money left on the table for a buyer, you're not actually maximizing the sale of your company. Because when a buyer comes in, they want to be able to see, oh, there's more money on the table. And that's going to push the value up, right?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, because if, you don't want to be here's a great story and analogy, and I don't know how many people know about it, but so there was a private equity firm that bought Blockbuster and ran them into the ground.
Okay, go ahead. I want to bring into the story.
Because so they bought Blockbuster and ran them into the ground because they literally it was straight line man, because that was the top, right? So Blockbuster hit their top, and then they just the private equity firm, which is just pure numbers. They said, okay, how many late fees are out there? How many rentals are out there? And then it was literally liquidation value. But they bought it, but it was just purely a numbers play. But that was it. That wasn't max value whatsoever. I mean, it was almost liquidation value in the marketplace.
Yeah. And can I tell you, I mean, we look at a company like Blockbuster or like Borders, and we're like, oh boy, they really messed it up. Well, I mean, the reason Barnes and Noble, pulled ahead and Borders went out of business was because Borders outsourced their online ordering to Amazon. So they gave up the online ordering of books, that, which was the big future trend. If you look at Blockbuster and really drill down into the technology that crippled that entire industry, it was DVDs and the US mail.
Isn't that funny?
Whoever bought Blockbuster, I hope they're not listening. Right. But it's like they missed out on, to draw an analogy, the biggest time since Gutenberg, the greatest opportunity since online home or since home video, right, was simply making that leap from retail stores to your mailbox. And they just failed to do it for whatever reason,
Well, and actually, let's expand on that for whatever reason, because I think it actually even, it proves your point of acquisition even more, Walker, is that so 70% of Blockbuster's revenue came from their late fees. So they literally physically couldn't do what Netflix was doing because Netflix said, I'm going to go in and charge $10 a month. So they would be cannibalizing their own profits and their own shareholders because the market was shifting. So they should have gone out and bought people to get into that space. But when you look at the P&L, they can't do it because they're paralyzed by where they get their profits. And my old industry had that problem, which is where's the problem? Well, this profit center. So copiers manage IT software. When the reality is what we had done at the last part is it's profit per customer. Who gives a shit what they buy? And right? I mean,
that's right.
But you have all these corporate bureaucracies of people just arguing internally because of their bonus structures.
Well, let's talk about John Warrillow again. This is the automatic customer. again, it's just something that they didn't see. And if you had the Blockbuster brand, right, and you could buy the Blockbuster brand, then there's no other company that could have competed with Netflix once Netflix really got going. Yep. Blockbuster was the only one, and they just missed the opportunity. They didn't make the leap to the new trend.
So as we're kind of wrapping up here, Walker, if you think, I think for the listeners who are going, okay, I get all this and it all makes sense, or to a certain degree, is what is it like, when you're going in there, what is your kind of maybe 2 cents of when you're looking at a business and you're valuing it, and like, you can kind of tie it back into Warlow or any of the other people, but the value building, because it's as a buyer, it's just the risk. So a value driver is just also a risk factor. So like, what are the things that you look for and that you will increase your value that you will pay or decrease? I mean, is there some big glaring things that you kind of want to just say, hey, keep thinking about these things if you're marching towards an exit?
I'm not like a value buyer or anything like that, but paying big multiples just scares me, period. Right. And a lot of high growth companies, they get a lot of attention. They're really sexy. They push big multiples. Those scare me to death. It's just not my thing. At the same time, drastic turnaround is not my flavor either. I think that I really look at the market, and as an advisor for online businesses, what I love about it so much is that you learn that the customer feedback loop in the market on online businesses is very fast, right? I mean, we sell like, 90% of our listings in 90 days. I mean, it just is so fast because they're easy to transfer, they're easy to validate, they're easy to operate compared to, 50 employee manufacturing company or whatever. And what I learned from that is that the market is just brutally honest. And I think a lot of times you'll find a buyer a seller, and I'm switching gears now to the buyer, and I'll be talking to a seller, and or their broker, and I start to figure out like, okay, a couple of things. One, they are trying to present themselves as if they're in an adolescent market and like push this multiple, which actually makes no sense at all, right? And they might be able to push that kind of a multiple to a strategic buyer, but understanding that you're not a strategic buyer is really important. Right. And just because, they're kind of pricing it, one way doesn't mean that you have to believe in it. I'm not saying, go out and get a deal all the time. I'm just saying, be the buyer that you are. Okay. Don't pretend like you're a different buyer, because you can really burn yourself with that.
That's good feedback.
Yeah. I had one other thing, and Brian, I can't remember what it was.
Well, I think it's good feedback, Walker, because I think whether you're buying or selling, I mean, as an entrepreneur, you should technically be, and maybe it's honestly just as simple as this, Walker, is like, this is the game that entrepreneurs should be playing, right? It shouldn't be arguing about your KPIs at your management team. Like, this is what entrepreneurship is. And whether you're buying or selling, it's the same stuff, right? And what happens, I find that people just don't ever think about it or listen or do it. And then they just get blindsided because they don't know what the market's talking about. And so they're just totally out of whack with what they're thinking.
And one more thing, Ryan, I mean, the other thing that I look for, and this is, maybe I should announce it on a podcast, but I always try to look for, the fundamentals of the business. And I look for really, truly like kind of old economy style fundamentals. And then I want to be the person to kind of bring the new economy to it. Right. So in other words, if I can find that company that it hasn't really taken advantage of the internet yet. And, consider the $10 trillion in business value that needs to change hands, and all the boomers that own these companies, a lot of them, I'm not over, whatever, but a lot of them,
it is what it is.
They don't have any debt, right? They haven't, really hustled for a decade because they're comfortable. Maybe they're making whatever their number is, $200,000 a year, $1 million a year, whatever it is. And they're just kind of cruising along, putting their kids through college and living the good life. And, when it comes time to sell, there's going to be a huge opportunity for the person that has that skill set that can come in and just, upgrade the business. And that's kind of what I look for. That's my sort of recipe.
No, and I think it actually speaks to the kind of the reality of what it is. We're like, and I honestly, that's the interesting dynamics that my dad and I had, Walker, because, like, okay, are we going to dump another $2 million into this company for managed IT service? And he's looking at me going, "You're crazy.
Right. You're crazy.
I want my money." I'm like, but come on, this is going to be cool. And so, like, I think a lot, they do lose the fire and the hustle and the return on the capital and investments that they're going to get. Like, I mean, are they going to see that for the timeline that they want? And that kind of goes into your kind of I think that's an interesting overlay. And I don't know if that's something that you've kind of articulate it, but like you have the growth, where they're at in the industry and the growth, but then you throw on the timeline of the entrepreneur, and it can tell a lot too of why those things haven't been upgraded and done. Because I mean, it just makes too much sense.
Right. I think the most overrated question is, why are they selling? Everyone's always like, oh, they see something around the corner, there's a snake in the bushes or whatever. They're selling because they built something of value and it's time to exit. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what's happening, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. So as we're wrapping up here, Walker, with all the different things that we've talked about, your whole book, which everybody will have links in the show notes, everybody's got to go out and read it. If there's something from the book or from the podcast or something we didn't talk about, and you want to leave the listeners with it, what would it be?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I would say, go to buythenbuild.com and check it out. I think, I've got the book out there. I put a little course together, and my goal is, my long-term goal is that, if I can generate enough interest with Buy Then Build, I want to build out a complete community and eventually marketplace. So if you want to get a hold of me or learn anything about anything that we're trying to get done, it's at buythenbuild.com.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Walker, thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a blast.
Thanks, Ryan. I enjoyed it.